Scott Newton from Strategy Tools. We are glad for having you here in our 16th edition of Agile Leaders Meeting. So the Scott will speak about the challenge and opportunity, how to develop your strategy team for better performance. Scott, the stage is yours.
Thank you, and it's nice to be here virtually. I've been many times to Sao Paulo, both for business and for personal reasons, and it's a beautiful city, so I'm really happy for this opportunity. So what we want to spend the next few minutes speaking about is how you can develop your strategy team. And this is a question I'm asked a lot by both boards and CEOs. And usually the complaint or the concern they have is they say they need more bench strength. And so bench strength, of course, is how strong is your team when you're starting. We can think about the very famous football or soccer in Brazil, or from my home country, Canada, we can think about hockey. And I've got a picture here of the hockey team. And we hear this, we need more bench strength. And so I want to start with a little story. It goes back 40 years ago today, and it has to do with the United States and Russia, and it's what was called the Miracle on Ice. So the Russian hockey team had won 4 Olympics in a row. They were not defeated in 60 games of the Olympics. No one had been able to beat them. And the United States decided they were going to try to beat the Russians in hockey. And the Russian team were all the best experts, and the American team were actually mostly children. They were coming out of university. They had never even played professionally. They won the Olympics. It was called Miracle on Ice. Many people refer to it as the best hockey story in 100 years. But what this really tells us is that strategy is not a miracle. It is a learned and well-practiced process. And just like in your own company, you would like to have this possibility to have the best team and all the best people all the time. It doesn't really work that way. We start with the team we have, and we can actually use them to become very successful. And so when we think about strategy, the world is changing. And my question is, how can your team be ready for it? I want to start maybe with a definition of what strategy is. So strategy is the framework of choices that are going to define the purpose and the path of your organization. This is all about decision-making. This is about the future of your business. And we know this is working when we're using strategy to guide the operational and day-to-day decision-making. So this is really about where your company is going to be at the end of a time frame, and it's a roadmap that we can use to guide change and engage opportunities. It answers the what and the why. And I think this is very important because most of the time when I go and talk to companies, they say, okay, we want to be better at strategy. And I ask them, okay, when you say strategy, what do you mean? What is your definition? And I'll get 10 or 20 executives, managers, they will write up their definition of strategy, and every person will mean something completely different. So it's this ability to start by setting a framework that will help us in becoming better at this. And when I say it's about decision-making, it's about everyone using the same process to make decisions. So the more that we can have the same types of criteria, the same ways of evaluating a decision, the better we'll become at making strategy part of what the company does and what it's about. So the next thing is, when I ask most of my clients, the companies we work with today, how they see strategy, they draw a picture that looks something like this. And they say, you know what, there's not even such a thing as a new normal because normal is changing every day. And what we're doing is we're accelerating this change. And so how do we survive and how do we improve in this kind of environment? And this brings us back to a quote that the former CEO of IBM used often, which is, the only way we can survive is to continuously transform ourselves into something else. And the good thing about the time we're in right now, which is very challenging for all of us as leaders, managers, board members, shareholders, is that crisis forces reimagination. So when you go back in history and you look, whether we look at the Spanish flu in World War I, companies like Boeing were created, Rolls-Royce and Renault were invented. We had new products that were developed that had never existed before. If we look in the Great Depression, Baxter, the pharmaceutical group, was launched. Bridgestone, one of the world's largest tire companies, was created, and Allstate Insurance was started to try to protect people against the Great Depression. And then in World War II, we had companies like Kia, McDonald's, Dow Chemicals, and products including the computer, which we all depend on for meetings like this today, and the jet engine. And I can go on with what's happening with FedEx and Microsoft, and then during SARS, what happened with Pandora and Baidu, Alibaba and Amazon. And the question is, what comes now with COVID? So COVID is a pandemic. It is creating big challenges, but if we can engage our teams correctly, it creates a tremendous opportunity. So as one of our colleagues at Strategy Tools likes to say, Rita McGrath, we are working with outdated tools and outdated assumptions. And the question becomes, how do we get our teams to learn new ways? And where we've had a tremendous amount of success is through bundling online tools, what we call our transformation program, together with a gamification, using simulations to help executives understand how they can impact change, and then giving them new sets of tools. Those tools can be online, those tools can be visual, those tools can be questioning. But what we're giving them is a new way to think about how business is taking place and really challenging them with cases of what's going on. So one of the areas that we look at a lot is artificial intelligence, for example. And when we look at artificial intelligence, we can take a look at Schneider Electric, which has done some great things on installing technology to make buildings more efficient. DBS, the banking group out of Singapore, and DBS has been able to reduce the times that people wait in queue at the bank. Under Armour, I know many of you love fitness and how they've been able to use AI to predict new products that people would like. Media, which is a Norwegian media company, been very successful in transforming what the media business looks like. And several other examples. I like to always remember also Microsoft, and I heard some of the other speakers referring to the growth mindset earlier today of how we can balance conviction with patience. So taking these cases of some of the world's best companies and helping executives study them and learn from what these companies are doing, putting it in the context of new tools, new frameworks, and common decision-making. So when we look at organizations, 71% of 10,000 companies that Accenture has analyzed are currently going through significant disruption. The interesting thing about this is this study was actually done in December of last year. So you can imagine this disruption that we're feeling today, given that this was already taking place before the whole COVID started to hit. And in fact, my colleague Tiago, who is based in Brazil with Strategy Tools, he's completed a study recently on what strategists in Brazil wish they had. And their teams came back saying, we wish that our companies had more abstraction power, more systemic vision, foresight, and future thinking. And so this is the biggest request that strategists in Brazil have. And we see the same thing, whether we look at Italy, where I'm based, we look at markets like Switzerland or Germany, United States. They're all saying they wish they had this type of power and this type of vision. And so then how do we install that? And one of the ways I recommend that you can do this is to change how you look at strategy. So in my work with Strategy Tools, we've created the 2 lenses on strategy approach. On one side, we can look at strategy as analysis. This is the classic way that Michael Porter developed. Strategy is something very logical. It's something that we expect the future to be stable. We expect that people are rational, that we can preserve our existing business models, and we just need to make them more efficient. We use tools like SWOT, PESTLE, value chain, and 5 forces, and that change is very difficult and that it creates resistance. So this is where most managers, most board members and CEOs start from. What we want to do is shift that now to a new way of thinking where we approach strategy as innovation. And so similar to some of my colleagues that spoke earlier this morning, we want to talk about the mindset as being creative and disruptive. When we look at ambitions, understanding how we can be offensive and knowing that the future is unstable and different from the past. Many people today understand that a lot more because of COVID, but we're still struggling to really say, if we expect the future to be different, how can we build on that as a strategy team? We also know that people are working more with passion and that they are continually developing and testing portfolios of new business models. So how do we install that in our own business? Whether we're dealing with a business unit or we're dealing with the whole corporation, how can we get those teams to start really testing business models and how understanding that there's a portfolio of business models they can use to do this? And so we have tools that involve disruptive innovation, business model canvas, which many of you are familiar with, a great tool from Strategizer, a strategy innovation canvas, and an innovation pyramid. Because what we're doing is we're installing in the team the love to create change and to make change happen. And here we have proponents like Gary Hamel. He's got his new book out now, Humanocracy, and he's working through this at London Business School. Fantastic read if you haven't had an opportunity yet. And Rita McGrath and Seeing Around Corners, which is another really good way to understand how we might be able to predict and look at the future. And I think an important part of this is to teach our people to not be constrained by traditional industry categories and competitors. So when we talk to a lot of companies and we talk to management teams, they know very well their market share compared to their closest competitor. If you speak to Coca-Cola, they can tell you everything about Pepsi, how Pepsi advertises, what Pepsi's business model is, very traditional competitor. But they might struggle if we look at competitors that are not necessarily related to their business. And so it's encouraging people to get out of the building and to begin to explore new ideas and looking for those new ways that customers are struggling that is really powerful. One of the things that I encourage executives to do is to go and sit with the customer service team, because the customer service team in your company is every day hearing the challenges and problems that your customers face. Another thing that executives don't often have a lot of time for is to get out and see the customer firsthand, the end user. How are they using your product? What are the difficulties they're having? And how can we systematically collect that information so that it's feeding back in real time into the organization? When I talk about building the strategy team, this is really what I'm talking about. And then, of course, how can we make strategy fun? So strategy doesn't have to be a PowerPoint slide. Strategy doesn't have to be another big Excel file. Let's use some tools like gamification. Let's use some tools like simulations and get people really involved in the strategy. If you look at this photo, this is a group we were working with in the Nordic countries. Look how engaged people are. They're loving strategy. They're not bored about it. This is a digital transformation workshop we did with Copenhagen Business School and their executive education platform. And again, people are really getting involved. We're using some tools in a creative way where, yes, strategy is fun, but then we're linking it right back into their workplaces. And I think what I'd leave you with, if I can leave you with one thing, is when you're working with your teams on strategy, are you going all in? So is there a way that we can get everyone committed to really working on this and thinking about the new ways to do things? How do we make strategy part of a disruptive culture and not something we do once a year? And I'll give you a last example of that. I was working with a company this week and they said, yeah, our strategy isn't working very well. I said, oh, okay. Can I see your strategy? And they said, oh, it's a very important document. We spent a lot of money getting this done. I said, great, can I see it? And they had to phone around to 4 or 5 different offices in the company to find the strategy. And they're like, oh yeah, I think it's in the CFO's office. No, the CEO had it. No, the board took it. And my comment back to them was, how can your strategy be working if it's not a living, breathing thing that people are using every day? And when I talk about being all in on strategy, that's what I mean. Getting your people really connected to what it is you're doing and having them all living and breathing this. So thanks a lot for the time to talk this evening. I have a few minutes now for questions, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Great. Thank you, Scott. We have a few questions for you here. The first one is how to bring leaders in traditional company to discuss the strategy, especially with this new approach you showed us. How to start?
So one of the first things I would do is get people to recognize that the way they're working on strategy now isn't working. And the easiest thing to do, start with the exercise that I suggested in the presentation. Ask people to define what strategy is and get people to just write on a piece of paper in a notebook, what's your definition of strategy? And when we get those and we compare them, we'll see that the executive team, the board, the management, they all have different ideas of what even strategy means. And so this is a really good starting point because when people recognize they're not even speaking the same language when they think about strategy, they'll be much more motivated to do something to change, and you can launch from there.
Great. And the last one, what is the ultimate strategy? Is there something like this?
Well, the ultimate strategy is when all your stakeholders are happy and your business is sustainable. This is really the ultimate strategy. What I'd say, you know your strategy is working when everyone in the company is engaged. So everyone ranging from the guy who's working the gate or the security to the CEO, they all understand very clearly what the goals of the company are, and they know how their decision-making will impact that. So too often I see companies, they want to have 60, 70, 80 goals. That's not strategy. Those could be tactics. We might need those plans in order to get where we're going, but your strategy is when you know the 2 or 3 things that, if done well, will make your company successful. That's the ultimate strategy.
Great. Thank you for having you here, Scott. Thank you for your time. It was an incredible presentation.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity. It's really nice to get to meet all of you, and I look forward to learning from the other participants this evening.